The warm evening air carried the scent of freshly pressed olives and aged oak barrels as the Torrenzo Olive Estate's annual harvest celebration buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses. Gabriella stood near the back of the elegantly decorated courtyard, swirling a glass of deep green extra virgin olive oil, a tradition before the celebratory feast. This estate was her family's legacy, passed down for 3 generations, and 6 months ago it had nearly been lost. When her parents called her in distress, pleading for help, she didn't hesitate. Without a contract or legal agreement, she wired her entire life savings, $850,000, trusting that her role in the family business would be secured. Yet, as she listened to her father's next words, her stomach turned to Tonight, Emilio announced grandly, his voice echoing off the stone walls, marks a new chapter for our family and this estate. We are thrilled to introduce the next leader of Torrenzo Olive Estate, Raphael. The crowd erupted into applause. Gabriella felt frozen in place, her glass halfway to her lips. Raphael? Her younger brother? The one who had never worked a day in the olive groves, who had spent his years posting Instagram photos of wine tastings instead of learning about soil composition and pressing techniques? She had saved this estate from foreclosure, and now her father was handing the reins to the golden child who had never sacrificed anything. Raphael stepped forward, beaming in a tailored suit, his expensive watch glinting under the golden lights. Thank you, everyone, he said smoothly. I'm honored to continue our family's tradition and lead us into the future. Gabriella's mother, Isabella, touched her arm gently. Gabriella, you understand, don't you? She whispered. Raphael has the business degree. He's the natural choice to manage the estate's future. Gabrielle forced a smile, though her pulse pounded in her ears. Of course, Mama, she said lightly, raising her glass. To Raphael, the new CEO of Torrenzo Olive Estate? Her voice stayed steady, but inside, an icy rage coiled in her chest. As the celebration continued around her, Gabriella excused herself, stepping onto the terrace overlooking the estate. She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a contact she hadn't expected to need. Ava Morales, a ruthless corporate lawyer she had met at an agricultural conference. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed a simple message. I need your help with a family business matter. Are you free tomorrow? Seconds later, Ava's response flashed across the screen. 10:00 a.m. at my office. Bring all documentation. Gabriella exhaled slowly. If her family thought they could use her money and push her aside, they were about to learn a painful lesson. Gabriella sat in the sleek, glass-walled office of Eva Morales, overlooking the bustling streets of downtown Barcelona. The morning sun streamed in, casting a glow over the polished wooden desk where Gabriella's bank statements, transfer receipts, and family correspondence lay spread out. Eva, dressed in a sharp navy blazer, flipped through the documents with practiced precision, her dark eyes narrowing. So let me get this straight, she said, looking up. 6 months ago, your parents begged you to save the estate from foreclosure, promised you a secured role in the business, and you wired $850,000 into their account without a written agreement? Gabriella shifted uncomfortably in her seat. They're my family, she murmured, the words tasting bitter now. At the time, I wasn't thinking about contracts. I was thinking about saving the estate, our legacy. Eva let out a slow exhale, tapping a manicured nail against the desk. And now they've installed your inexperienced brother as CEO and are pretending your investment was just, what, a generous donation? Gabriella's jaw tightened. It feels that way. Eve leaned forward. What exactly did they promise you? Gabriella closed her eyes, remembering that desperate phone call. Her father had sworn that the money would ensure her permanent place in the estate's leadership. Her mother had cried, begging her to trust them, saying they would make it up to her. But now, as she sat in Eva's office, she realized none of it had ever been real. It had just been words. Empty words. I don't have it in writing, Gabrielle admitted, her stomach sinking. Evidently concerned. That's not necessarily a problem. Did anyone witness these conversations? Gabrielle sat up straighter, suddenly remembering the accountant. Carlos, he was there when I visited to arrange the transfer. He even suggested we put something in writing, but my parents brushed him off, saying it would insult the family's trust. Eva's eyes gleamed with interest. Carlos could be very useful. She flipped a page in the stack of documents. Your parents overleveraged the estate, didn't they? I bet your money didn't just save the business. It funded something else. We need to dig deeper. Gabriella frowned. What are you saying? I'm saying, Eva replied, sliding Gabriella's bank statements toward her. This isn't just about being pushed aside. This could be financial fraud. And if that's the case, we don't just send a polite demand letter. We build a legal case strong enough to make them sweat. Gabriella felt a slow, rising anger replace her earlier disbelief. She had trusted them completely, and they had used her. Ava's voice was sharp, decisive. First step, we send a demand letter. They have 30 days to repay you, with interest. Or we escalate. Gabriella nodded, her resolve hardening. If her family thought they could take her money and leave her behind, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The demand letter landed like a bombshell at Torenzo Olive Estate. Gabriella was barely back in her apartment when her phone buzzed furiously with Raphael's name flashing on the screen. She considered ignoring it, but decided otherwise. She answered with a calm, steady voice. Are you insane? Raphael's voice was already raised. A lawsuit? Over money you gave to help our family? Gabrielle leaned back in her chair, unbothered. It wasn't a gift, Raphael. It was an investment, one I made because our parents assured me I'd have a place in the business. You're going to destroy everything. Dad is having chest pains because of you, he shouted, his words laced with desperation. Gabriella exhaled slowly. The solution is simple. Return my investment with interest, $850,000 plus 8%. And I withdraw the case. There was silence on the other end before Raphael scoffed. That money went into saving the estate. You want us to bankrupt it just to pay you back? No, Gabriella corrected, her voice turning sharp. I want you to own up to what you did. You and our parents took my money, knowing full well you weren't planning to honor our agreement. You could have offered me a leadership role, but instead you handed the estate over to someone who doesn't even know the difference between cold-pressed and refined olive oil. Raphael's voice turned sly. You know, verbal agreements in family businesses are complicated. You can't prove anything. Gabriella smirked, though he couldn't see it. Actually, I just got off the phone with Carlos. You remember him, don't you? Our accountant. He's given a sworn statement about the day I made the transfer, how he advised putting our agreement in writing, and how Dad promised me a secured place in the business. The line went silent. Then, after a long pause, Raphael muttered, Hold on, Dad wants to talk to you. A moment later, her father's voice, tight with anger, came through. Gabrielle, what are you doing? After everything we've done for you? Gabrielle didn't hesitate. Everything you've done for me? Let's talk about that. You paid for Raphael's MBA, his car, his apartment, while I built my own career. The only time I ever asked for anything was when you promised me a future in this business. We never promised you control, her father snapped. I'm not asking for control anymore, she said coldly. I'm asking for my money back. You have 30 days. Then she hung up. It was their move now. Gabriella stirred her espresso absent-mindedly, watching as Carlos slid a thick folder across the cafe table. His hands were tense, his expression cautious. I started reviewing the estate's books after you sent that demand letter, he said in a hushed tone, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear. And you're going to want to see this. Gabrielle flipped open the folder and felt her stomach drop. The financial statements were neatly highlighted, each entry more damning than the last. Her $850,000 had done more than just save the estate. It had funded a series of personal expenses disguised as business costs. She traced a finger down the page. A Mercedes SUV marked as a delivery vehicle? She muttered. Carlos nodded. Your brother's car. Gabriella's eyes flicked to the next entry. A luxury vacation to Santorini, labeled as market research. Carlos exhaled sharply. That was your parents'. And look at this one. Raphael's MBA tuition, backdated as an employee education reimbursement. Gabrielle felt her grip tighten on the pages. They used my investment for all of this? Carlos nodded grimly. And that's not even the worst part. He flipped to another document. 2 weeks before your father announced Raphael as CEO, he and your mother registered a new company, Torenzo Holdings LLC. Gabriella's heart pounded. What? They've been quietly transferring assets from Torenzo Olive Estate to this new holding company, Carlos explained. On paper, the original estate, the one you invested in, is being hollowed out. If this continues, your claim will be worthless because the vineyard will technically have no assets left. Gabriella's blood ran cold. They weren't just dismissing her contribution. They were actively ensuring she couldn't fight back. She closed the folder carefully, her mind already racing. Does Raphael know about this? Carlos hesitated before answering. I don't think so. This looks like something your parents orchestrated to keep everything under their control. Gabriella clenched her jaw. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. This was calculated fraud. She reached for her phone and texted Eva immediately. We have a bigger problem than I thought. Call me ASAP. Carlos watched her carefully. What are you going to do? Gabriella exhaled, steadying herself. I'm going to make sure they regret ever underestimating me. Gabriella sat across from Eva Morales, who skimmed through the damning financial records Carlos had provided. The lawyer's lips curled into a knowing smirk. They really thought they could get away with this, she mused, tapping a highlighted entry with her pen. They didn't just misuse your investment. They tried to erase your claim entirely. Gabriella's fingers tightened into fists. They funneled assets into a shell company. They paid for Raphael's luxuries with my money. And now they think they can stonewall me until I give up. Eva leaned back, steepling her fingers. Well, we're about to prove them wrong. It's time for a more aggressive approach. She grabbed a notepad and started jotting down key points. We'll send a revised demand letter, this time outlining the fraudulent transfers. We'll demand full repayment, $850,000 plus 8% interest, within 30 days, along with all financial records since your investment. Gabriella arched a brow. And if they ignore it? Eva's smirk widened. Then we escalate. We file a lawsuit that will open their books to a full forensic audit. Trust me, the last thing they want is the Spanish financial authorities sniffing around their little asset transfers. Gabrielle's phone buzzed. Raphael, she ignored it. A minute later, another text arrived. You're making a huge mistake. You can't prove anything. Gabriella exhaled, then typed back. Actually, I just had a long conversation with Carlos. You remember him, don't you? Our accountant. He gave a full statement about Dad's promises and the money trail. Tick, tick, Raphael. The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Evia chuckled. That'll rattle them. But be prepared. They won't go down without a fight. Your parents are going to try guilt, manipulation, maybe even threats. Gabrielle set her jaw. Let them try. I'm done playing nice. Eva slid the freshly typed letter across the table. Then let's send this off. By this time tomorrow, your family will know you're not bluffing. Gabriella took a deep breath, then nodded. She had given them a chance to do the right thing. Now, it was war. Gabrielle barely had time to sip her morning coffee before her phone erupted with incoming calls. Her mother, her father, Raphael. She ignored them all. Instead, she focused on the message from Mateo Ruiz. a loan officer and Raphael's former friend, who had agreed to look into the estate's financial situation. His response was exactly what she expected. The estate's financials are a mess. They applied for an emergency loan, but the books raised too many red flags. No bank will touch them without a full audit. Gabriella smirked. That meant her family was officially out of options. Just as she was about to call Eva with the update, Raphael's name appeared on her screen again. This time, she answered. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his voice laced with panic. "Holding you accountable," Gabriella replied coolly. "You have 25 days left to repay me, Raphael. Better get creative." "You think forcing us to take out a loan is a win?" he shot back. "Do you even realize what you're doing to this family?" Gabrielle sighed. "No, Raphael, I realize what you did to me. You stole from me. You let our parents push me aside like my contribution meant nothing." Raphael's voice dropped to a whisper, suddenly calculating. "The estate can't survive this. You're going to destroy us." "Not my problem," Gabrielle said. "Maybe you should have thought about that before you let them rob me blind." There was silence before Raphael muttered, "Dad wants to talk to you." A moment later, her father's voice, strained and angry, came through. "Gabrielle, listen to me. You can't do this. If we let the banks in, they'll take over everything. This is your family's legacy." Gabrielle leaned back in her chair. "Then you should have treated me like part of the family, Dad." Silence. Then, her mother's voice came on the line, softer, pleading. "Come over for dinner. Let's talk about this as a family." Gabriella's stomach twisted for a moment, but she had fallen for that trick too many times before. "We're not family right now, Mom. We're business associates in a dispute. Have your lawyer call mine." Then she hung up. The family was unraveling, and she hadn't even played her best card yet. With just a few days left on the deadline, Gabriella knew her family was scrambling. Carlos sent her updates from inside the estate. Her father was arguing with financial advisors, Rafael was calling every bank in Spain, and her mother had gone through half a box of tissues playing the martyr. But no one could save them from the reality they had created. No bank would issue them a loan without an audit, and an audit would expose everything. Then, just after midnight, her phone lit up with a message from Mateo Ruiz. "Your parents are considering selling partial control of the estate to outside investors. It's their last option." Gabriella smiled. They were finally breaking. The next morning, her father called, his voice laced with defeat. "Gabriella, listen. The banks are willing to help, but they want control over financial decisions for 5 years. That means external oversight, board members, restrictions. This isn't how our family does business." Gabriella was unimpressed. "Then pay me back in full, plus interest, and you can run the estate however you want." Her father let out a bitter laugh. "We don't have the liquid capital, and you know it." Gabriella leaned back in her chair. "Then it sounds like you have a decision to make." He was silent for a long moment before speaking again, his voice lower, calculated. "Your mother thinks you won't really file with the financial authorities. She says you're too soft to destroy your own family." Gabriella's grip on her phone tightened. They were still trying to manipulate her, even now. She let the silence stretch before answering coldly. "You have 12 hours to find out if she's right." And then she hung up. By nightfall, the estate's legal team had agreed to the investor deal. A new bank-controlled financial oversight board would take charge, meaning Raphael wouldn't be making any decisions without approval. More importantly, Gabriella's full investment was transferred back into her account, $150,000 plus interest. As she refreshed her banking app and saw the balance, she felt a rush of victory. She had won, and better yet, she had something bigger planned. Gabriella stood at her apartment window, watching the city lights flicker like embers, her mind already on the next phase of her plan. The money was back in her account, but this wasn't just about finances anymore. It was about making sure they never underestimated her again. As if on cue, her phone buzzed with an incoming call from her father. She let it ring twice before answering. "You've got your damn money," he snapped, voice hoarse from exhaustion. "What more do you want?" Gabriella smirked, settling into her chair. "Nothing, Dad. I got exactly what I wanted." Silence. Then his voice dropped into something dangerous, something more like a warning than a plea. "You made us take on outside investors. They'll control everything now. You think you won, but you just sold out your own family's legacy." Gabrielle let out a small laugh. "No, Dad, you did that the moment you stole from me. I just made sure I wasn't the only one paying for your mistakes." Then came the final blow. "You should also know," she added smoothly, "I just placed an offer on Sierra Hills Olive Farm." The sharp inhale on the other end of the line was everything she needed to hear. "You wouldn't," his voice wavered. "I would, and I did," she leaned back, savoring the moment. "By next harvest season, you won't just have an investor-controlled estate, you'll have direct competition. And trust me, Dad, I won't be making the same mistakes you did." There was silence on the line, thick with realization. Then a low, bitter laugh. "So, that's it? You're going to war with your own family?" Gabriella's lips curled. "I'm just finally playing the game by your rules." She ended the call before he could respond. Her phone immediately lit up with texts from Raphael, her mother, relatives demanding explanations, guilt trips, and desperate pleas to reconsider. She ignored them all. Instead, she opened her laptop, pulled up the official purchase agreement for Sierra Hills, and signed it. The Torienzo Olive estate had stolen from her. Now they'd be forced to compete against the only person who had ever truly cared about its success. And Gabriella never played to lose. The sun dipped below the rolling hills of Sierra Hills Olive Farm, casting a golden glow over the freshly tilled soil. Gabriella inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of ripe olives and crisp autumn air. This land was hers now, a symbol of everything she had built, not out of revenge, but out of determination. Torenzo Olive Estate had been her family's legacy, but this was hers. Beside her, Carlos scrolled through financial reports on his tablet, now her official CFO. "The investors at Torenzo just vetoed Raphael's request for a new tasting room," he said with a smirk. "They told him to focus on olive quality first." "Well," Gabriella chuckled. Imagine that, actual business oversight. She knew Torenzo was struggling under the weight of its new investors. Raphael, once free to spend recklessly, was now under financial restrictions. Her parents had been forced to answer to people who wouldn't tolerate their mismanagement. And yet, they still sent her messages every week. Her mother pleading for family unity, her father too proud to apologize. She never responded. Instead, she ran her fingers over a worn leather notebook she had received in the mail a week ago, addressed in her father's handwriting. Inside were handwritten notes from her grandfather, detailing olive varieties, weather patterns, and soil techniques. A single note was tucked inside the cover. "This belongs with someone who understands its value." For the first time in a long time, Gabriella smiled. She tucked the notebook under her arm and turned to the workers waiting for her instructions. "Let's get to work," she said. Her new legacy was just beginning. The story of Gabriella and the Torenzo Olive Estate teaches a powerful lesson about trust, self-worth, and the importance of securing one's future. Gabriella's biggest mistake wasn't investing in her family. It was assuming that blood ties would guarantee loyalty and fairness. Trust was misplaced and her kindness was exploited, but instead of accepting betrayal, she fought back with intelligence, strategy, and patience. One key takeaway is that business and family should never mix without clear agreements. Gabriella's verbal deal with her parents left her vulnerable, proving that even the people closest to you can act in their own self-interest when money and power are at stake. Another lesson is that self-made success is more valuable than inherited privilege. Raphael was handed the CEO title, yet he lacked the knowledge and work ethic to run the estate properly. In contrast, Gabriella built her own path, turning her loss into an opportunity. Finally, the story highlights the power of calculated revenge, not through destruction, but through competition. Gabriella didn't need to destroy Terenzo. She simply needed to prove that she was always the more capable leader. True victory is not reclaiming the past, but building a future on your own terms.